What if I told you the NFL's biggest villain just completely vanished one day? Well, that's what happened to Josh Norman. He went from being a lockdown corner that made star receivers crash out to being out of the league in just a few seasons. But after days of research, I think I've uncovered the truth behind his dramatic fall. Coming out of high school, Josh Norman didn't have a single Division I offer. So after graduation, he decided to move in with his older brother, who played football at Coastal Carolina. While living with his brother, Josh took classes at Horry Georgetown Tech, the college right across the street from Coastal Carolina. After Josh finished classes for the day, he would cross the street and watch his brother's practice. However, while watching from the sidelines one day in 2007, Josh was offered a walk-on spot for the following season. So in 2008, Josh officially joined the Coastal Carolina football team. After playing in 12 games as a true freshman, Norman was finally given a scholarship before the start of his sophomore year. Following his final collegiate season, experts expected Norman to be a late-round day 3 pick in the 2012 NFL Draft. But during the pre-draft process, his draft stock soared. During Reese's Senior Bowl practices, Josh wowed coaches and scouts after racking up 6 interceptions. As the draft got closer, the cornerback was now projected to be a 3rd or 4th round pick. However, when draft day arrived, the 4th round came and went without Norman's name being called. Then finally, with the 143rd pick in the 5th round, the Panthers drafted the cornerback. In training camp, the rookie Norman battled with veteran quarterbacks for one of the starting spots, and right before week 1 of the regular season, it was announced Josh would be a starter. In week 8 of that season, Josh got the first interception of his career. However, after that game, his play started to decline, and by week 14, he was benched and moved down to the 4th cornerback spot on the depth chart. Entering the 2013 season, Josh moved up to the 3rd spot on the Panthers depth chart. But in the second game of the season, Norman messed up big time. With 6 seconds left in the game, the Bills had the ball on the Panthers 2, down a score. Before the play, fellow corner DJ Moore yelled to Norman to switch and cover Stevie Johnson, who was lined up in front of Moore. Norman says he didn't hear his teammate, and the miscommunication resulted in Johnson being wide open for the game-winning touchdown. After this disaster, head coach Ron Rivera basically benched Norman for the rest of the season. Josh only played in 7 games that year and started 0 of them. Prior to the 2014 season, the Panthers had lost multiple cornerbacks in free agency. Despite the team being thin at the position, Norman was not expected to start. You see, Norman was talented, but he often made bad decisions that resulted in the coaching staff not trusting him. For example, in a preseason game that year, Norman got up in the face of receiver Dwayne Bowe after breaking up a pass. Team captain Thomas Davis had to pull him away, and Ron Rivera then benched him for the rest of the game. To open up the 2014 season, Norman was the 5th cornerback on the team's depth chart. He was trending in the wrong direction. After being a starter his rookie year, he just moved further and further down the depth chart as the years went on. However, the Panthers secondary struggled once the season started, and by week 5, Norman was named a starter. Josh started to line up against opposing teams' number 1 wide receivers, and while he wasn't a shutdown corner yet, he did a good job slowing them down. In week 10, he held Jeremy Maclin to just 3 catches for 38 yards, and the very next week, he held one of the NFL's best wide receivers, Julio Jones, to 6 catches for 59 yards, which was one of Julio's worst games that season. That 2014 season, Josh was targeted 58 times and only gave up 27 catches for 291 yards. His 46.6% catch rate was the 2nd best in the league, only behind Vontae Davis. The Panthers made the playoffs that year too. In the team's wildcard game versus the Cardinals, Norman only conceded 1 catch for 9 yards. Before the 2015 season even started, Josh made headlines. During training camp, the corner got into a fight with his team's starting quarterback Cam Newton. Josh also started the regular season with a bang though, allowing just 3 catches for 5 yards, forcing a fumble and hauling in a pick 6 versus the Jaguars in week 1. The very next week versus the Texans, he was targeted 12 times and only gave up 40 yards. Then in week 3, Norman caught the game-winning interception versus the Saints. After not allowing 50 receiving yards in a game throughout the first month of the season, Josh was named the NFC Defensive Player of the Month. Following his 2-interception performance versus the Buccaneers, quarterbacks had a 23.1 passer rating when targeting Norman, which ranked first among all corners in the league. In week 6 versus Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, Josh only gave up 2 catches for -2 yards. During that game, Russ didn't really throw Norman's way, and after the game, Josh said he was the smartest QB they played so far because of that. In a rainy primetime game versus the Colts, Josh only conceded 1 catch for 15 yards. After the game, Norman said it felt like Gotham City out there, and he was Batman. Just keep that in mind for later. It might not seem important now, but it is. The Panthers were set to face off with the Cowboys in a huge Thanksgiving game. In that one, Josh only allowed Dez Bryant 1 catch for 6 yards. Throughout the first 14 weeks of the season, Norman held Pro Bowl wide receivers DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Evans, T.Y. Hilton, Dez Bryant, and Julio Jones to a combined 9 receptions for 89 yards, which is actually insane. Those receivers were each putting up 89 yards a game versus other cornerbacks. But then, in week 15, the game happened that changed Josh Norman's career. Also guys, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Underdog. If you guys signed up using my promo code SheGotSports, you'll get up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick. On Underdog, you can win up to 1,000 times your money by just choosing higher or lower on player stats like yards, touchdowns, receptions, and even fantasy points. Underdog is available in 30 plus states, including California and Texas. And by the way guys, here are my picks for this weekend's games. So make sure you guys go download the Underdog app and sign up using my promo code SheGotSports to claim your free pick and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Josh and the Panthers were set to face Odell Beckham Jr. and the New York Giants. There was a ton of hype surrounding this matchup because one of the best cornerbacks in the league was about to go head-to-head with one of the best wide receivers in it. The drama started before the game even began. In pregame, Odell rocked some custom Joker gloves, clearly an intentional move after Josh said he was Batman just a few weeks prior. On the opposing sideline, Norman came onto the field with a physical bat. This bat was there because a coach had given them a speech about coming out swinging, so the bat apparently symbolized that. But things got even crazier right before kickoff. According to former Giants punter Brad Wing, an unnamed Panthers player came up to Odell before the game started and said, quote, "I'll be the reason this will be your last game." Obviously, this enraged Odell, and once the game started, all hell broke loose. On just the 4th snap of the game, Beckham blew past Norman. He was wide open for a walk-in touchdown, but when the ball came his way, he dropped it. Josh yelled at Odell after this play, and the receiver yelled back. The next play was a run, and Beckham and Norman got tangled up, which resulted in Norman throwing the wide receiver on the ground. But this is nothing compared to what happened the rest of the game. On the Giants' next possession, Odell rammed into Norman and threw him into the ground. After he was down, Odell tried to throw a few punches, then ripped his helmet off and screamed in frustration. When Norman returned to the sideline, his teammates told him enough is enough. He just needed to walk away because the refs were going to start throwing flags. But that's not what happened. The next time the two were out on the field, Odell threw his hands at Norman's face mask, and this just continued to happen. In the second quarter, we finally saw the refs throw a flag after Odell engaged in a helmet-to-helmet hit with Norman. Josh had Odell crashing out. By the time halftime rolled around, the receiver didn't have a single catch. And remember, this is prime Odell. This guy was racking up 7, 8, 9, 10 catches a game. Late in the third quarter, OBJ finally got his first 2 catches, but on the second one, he grabbed Norman's leg as he was getting up, which resulted in yet another flag. Then, just 2 plays later, Odell came flying in and speared an unsuspecting Norman in the helmet after he hit him in the back of the head earlier in the route. After the whistle, you could hear Norman screaming in frustration on the broadcast. 2 plays later, Norman picked up a personal foul for this move. Even though it gave the Giants a first down, Norman had Odell so off his game, he wasn't even running routes. He was just trying to go after him. But with just over a minute left in the game, Odell locked back in and caught this game-tying touchdown while being covered by Norman. He then did his best Allen Iverson impression and stepped over Norman like he was Ty Lue. The Panthers ended up winning the game on a last-second field goal, and during his post-game interview, Norman said he just showed the world who OBJ really was. That game was absolute insanity. As a Giants fan, I remember watching it and being like, how is Odell not ejected? It was unreal. That game also marked the day when Josh Norman became a household name. What he did to the NFL's Golden Boy was unlike something we've ever seen before. It's when everyone realized, wow, this guy might be an elite corner and an elite trash talker. Norman ended the regular season by holding opposing quarterbacks to a passer rating of 54, which was the lowest in the league. He was named a first-team All-Pro and helped lead Carolina to a 15-win season. The Panthers made it all the way to the Super Bowl that year too, but ultimately they lost 24-10 versus the Broncos. In the offseason, Carolina tried to sign Norman to a new deal. However, the two sides couldn't come to an agreement, so the team let him hit free agency. Washington then made Norman the highest-paid cornerback in NFL history at the time by signing him to a 5-year, $75 million deal. Signing with Washington also meant Norman would face Odell Beckham Jr. and the Giants twice a year. The two faced off for the first time since their brawl in Week 3 of the 2016 season. There were a few little moments between the two during the game, but it was nowhere near as heated as their first meeting. Beckham also got the better of Norman in this one, hauling in 7 catches for 121 yards. Despite not making the Pro Bowl or being named an All-Pro, Josh still had a solid season in 2016. However, after turning 30 in 2017, his play started to decline. You see, cornerback might be the toughest position to stay elite at. Once a corner loses a step, they're basically cooked. So when Norman got older and lost some athleticism, he looked like a totally different player. In 2018, he gave up 733 yards and 8 touchdowns to the receivers he was defending. He also allowed opposing QBs to have a passer rating of 109 when targeting him. Remember, just 3 years earlier, QBs had a passer rating of 54 when throwing in his direction. This fall was drastic. In Week 12 of the 2019 season, Norman was benched due to poor play. In the 8 games he started that season, opposing quarterbacks had a passer rating of 128 when targeting him. In just 4 years, Norman went from a cornerback quarterbacks were afraid to throw near to one they targeted for easy completions. After the 2019 season ended, Josh was released by Washington. Despite the sharp decline in his play, the Bills signed him to a 1-year deal. However, in his very first start for the team, this happened.
He just made Josh Norman could reconsider whether or not he wanted to play again.
Josh only ended up starting 3 games for the Bills and was yet again a free agent at the end of the year. Before the start of the 2021 season, the 49ers signed Norman to a 1-year contract. After initially being picked up as a depth piece, Norman got to start 14 games after starter Jason Verrett tore his ACL in Week 1. While Norman was far from the best DB on the field, he did make some plays that helped San Francisco go all the way to the NFC Championship game. When the 2022 season began, Norman was a free agent. However, in December of that year, the Panthers signed him to their practice squad. He did get to play in the team's final 2 games before hitting free agency once again. In 2023, at 36 years old, Norman signed with the Bills practice squad. He played in 4 games that year, which ended up being his last in the NFL. While Norman hasn't officially announced his retirement, it seems like his playing days are behind him. Being 25 years old as a rookie really cut Norman's prime short. By the time he truly adjusted to the speed of the NFL, his athleticism was starting to decline. Also, the defensive scheme on the Panthers was a great fit for him. There he was surrounded by multiple All-Pros like Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis, which made his job easier. Michael Thomas is a wide receiver who was leading the league in receiving yards and then just vanished. If you want to hear about his story, check out this video up here.